So we'll hear now from Glenn Phillips. He is the executive director of the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. It's my pleasure to introduce Glenn, my colleague. He's been just great to work with. I always enjoy my conversations with him for his infectious enthusiasm and can-do attitude. So let me turn it over now to Glenn.
Thank you so much. So I am Glenn Phillips. I'm the executive director of the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. I grew up in the East Bay. I actually did my very first native plant gardening, helping my brother with an Eagle Scout project in 1982 at putting a native plant garden at the American Indian Center in Livermore. Since then, I've done some help design native plant garden at the Prospect Park Audubon Center in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm really thrilled to be back in the Bay Area, back home, and working on helping make the Bay Area safer for birds. The Golden Gate Bird Alliance, formerly known as the Golden Gate Audubon Society, is one of the oldest conservation organizations in Northern California. We were founded in 1917, so over 100 years ago, and we work around the Bay Area, especially in San Francisco and Western Alameda and Contra Costa counties. Probably I'm preaching to the choir here. If you care about native plants in your garden, you probably already know why you should care about birds, but let's just a quick reminder. So bird populations are declining pretty significantly. There are 30% fewer birds than there were 50 years ago. There are over 389 vulnerable bird species in North America. And direct human threats. So it's not just climate change, right? There are a lot of things that people do that actually directly impact birds negatively. And so we're going to just review a few of these things and what we can do about them. 30%, it's 3 billion birds over the past 50 years. This is 2022, actually data through 2019. So, here in the East Bay, we're pretty fortunate. This is the map of the East Bay Regional Park District. Sites that it's a pretty significant collection of green spaces that are protected for birds. So that's some good news for us. However, the parks can't do it alone. Right? 70% of the U.S. is privately owned. California has a lot of public lands in comparison to most of the country with 48%. It's still not enough. The estimates are that about between 60 and 75% of the land should be under some sort of conservation plan if we're going to keep our birds for the next century. So while climate change and habitat loss are really the big elephants in the room, there are a couple of really critical direct threats that people can manage and take care of. So the first is cats, probably between 2 and 4 billion. I'd say the average of all the studies comes out to about 2.4 billion birds a year. That's a lot of birds. And even well-fed cats will kill wildlife. So it's really critically important that we address this because outdoor cats will kill birds. A couple of studies have found that free-ranging cats are the leading cause of nest failure. And so that means that our adult birds may be able to survive and avoid cats, but nestlings can't. If we don't produce enough offspring, we won't have a next generation of birds.
Glenn, can I ask, by nest failure, do you mean that the parent leaves the babies to starve, or do you mean that the cats get the birds in the nest?
So a nest failure is when the eggs either don't hatch, so it could be eggs that are eaten by another bird. Watched a California scrub jay chasing some towhees around. It was, after the eggs in their nest. That could be a cause of nest failure. Just means that the nest didn't successfully pledge any young.
Can I say one more thing about cats before we leave? I remember you ran a catio presentation some time ago. Is that a presentation available online?
I don't know if it still is. It would be good to check. We have a lot on the Golden Gate Bird Alliance website. If you go to education, you can find videos of our past presentations, and there's a lot of good detail about all of these kinds of issues, including some more details about climate. I'm just going to talk very briefly about windows because the following presentation will go into more detail, but we're talking 1 billion birds a year. I want to remind you all that you probably have run into a glass window yourself or a glass sliding door. Usually if I do this talk in the room, I ask people to raise their hand. How many people have walked into a glass sliding door? And almost the entire room raises their hands. For us, it's embarrassing. For a bird, it's fatal. I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about if we're designing our yards for birds, there are a few things we have to think about. Some of which we'll hear from a lot of people over the course of this weekend and as you visit our gardens. But there's some things that we might not have, because I know I do this all the time too. I focus on the plant. So I can go on and on about planting California fuchsia for your hummingbirds and the moths that depend on them, but I want to talk big picture here. So there's some sounds in the background. Sorry about that. As this is that you're hearing a chestnut black chickadee. That's our common local backyard bird. So birds, there are four things. They need food. We talk a lot about that. They need water. They need shelter. So the structure of your yard actually is important. It's not just about what you've planted, but how you've planted and how you've organized it. And then they need a reduction of human threats, right? If we build the most perfect yard with all the food, water, and shelter, but we have glass and cats and pesticides and rodenticides in the garden, we're not doing the birds any favors. If you build it, they will come, but if they show up and the environment is not hospitable, then your backyard will become what we call a population sink. That means that more birds are dying in your yard than are being produced by it, and that's not good for birds in the long run. So food, well, we've talked a lot. I heard some of Jennifer's talked about this, that the native plants, of course, are really the best at producing the natural foods that our birds depend on. You really can't provide insects for your birds in any other way than by creating habitat for those insects. So one of the challenges of providing seeds for birds, you can cheat and have a bird feeder, or then this is a much better way, is you can actually grow your own seeds. But there are a few things you have to do. Like one, you can't deadhead every plant, but as soon as it's done blooming, because then the seeds won't be left over for the birds to eat. In this bottom left-hand corner, this is a weedy euphorbia, spotted spurge, a terrible weed, but it's a great bird food. That is a weed in my yard, and my first instinct was, I should pull all of these. But in fact, the seeds of this plant are extremely high in fat and high in protein, and birds adore them. And so at some point when I realized that the goldfinches and mourning doves and sparrows in my yard were flocking to this weed, I left it. And yes, I have an invasive species in my yard. But it's providing a real abundance of seeds. The birds just adore it. So as you probably all know, almost all of our upland birds depend on insects for a significant portion of their diet. Insects are key. So insects, some of the insects are, obvious things like caterpillars, but termites and ants are actually a really critically important food source for birds, particularly for migrating birds, as they tend to be seasonal in when they appear. And often it times up very nicely for migrating birds. So I know I have a dead tree in my backyard, and every fall the termites emerge, and they are particularly abundant. I say termites. So leaving space for termites in your yard is actually not a bad thing to do. Now, you don't want them on your house, so you want to make sure that you're not creating an entry point for termites into your home, right? So that having soil against wood is an invitation for termites. So you don't want that on your home, but having dead wood in your backyard with enough distance from your house, it really is a fantastic way to bring birds into your yard. And it's it's in here. It's very predictable in the fall after our first rain. Get a warm day after the rain, and you get termites out and about in numbers, and the birds go crazy. So this is high protein. This is a real treat for birds, and as particularly in migration, they need to rebuild that fuel fast. So don't hate your termites as long as they're not on your house. This is just a reminder of how important native plants are compared to non-native plants. I'm going to pass through this next set of slides really quickly, just because I know that a lot of people have talked about plants that are good for birds, but oaks. This is my message. And I talk to a lot of garden clubs, and the first thing I say to every garden club is we are very fortunate. We have oak trees in our communities, and they're here. There are natural species that are normally here, and you don't have to do anything to have an oak tree in your yard. So either you may have one already. If you don't, all you have to do is not remove them, because the birds are planting them in your yard. I have hundreds of oak trees in my yard. Some of them, when I moved in, and I was having some exotic trees removed because they were not necessary for our landscape. The contractor was like, "Oh, I should take that other tree out." Like, "No, over my dead body will you take that tree out? That's the only tree that's worth saving." It was a valley oak that had been bird planted, and luckily it was at a location that it wasn't too close to the house, it wasn't too close to the fence, and it's the only, when I bought the house, it was the only native plant in my entire garden. So it's doing fine, and I now have lots of baby oak trees all over my yard because I don't remove them, and we'll see which ones end up in places where I can keep them. I can't have trees everywhere, but we'll let those stay where they are. And there's just nothing like an oak tree for birds. If you want birds, plant an oak tree. Willows, great plants too. In my garden is very new, and so the ceanothus and manzanita are the core of my garden. They're the backbone. Lots of varieties in lots of places and lots of habits, and these are really abundant for lepidopteran species, and really critically important for birds in your yard. So as I said, it's not just about what you plant, it's also about how you manage it. And so one of the really important things to do is to be creating a diverse amount of habitat within your yard. And that means that you can't blow every single leaf away from your yard. You can't mulch every inch of it. Leave the leaves. That California towhee likes nothing more than to toss up the leaf litter and find insects and seeds that are hiding under the leaf litter. If you don't have any, if you've blown all the leaves and bagged them and sent them to the landfill, you're not helping your backyard. And the reality is that those plants benefit from the nutrients that those leaves restore to the soil. So you want to leave the leaves. Nectar plants are really, critically important for hummingbirds. And our native plants really are timed appropriately for our migratory hummingbirds. So we have Rufus and Allen's hummingbird that migrate through. The Anna's hummingbird, which is our most common hummingbird, is resident. It doesn't go anywhere. And its range has expanded dramatically over the last century, in large part because of our gardening habits. So these are species. The Anna's hummingbird really is dependent on our garden flowers. So if you're really after Anna's hummingbirds, a careful use of a small amount of non-natives can be useful, because they can fill in a few gaps in the flowering time. But you can get most of it. I mean, between monkey flower, California fuchsia, penstemon, flowering currant, you can get 90% of the year covered. So you don't need, you can put it in a pot. An aloe in a pot can cover up that month in between when before the monkey flower starts to bloom in the spring. If you don't have a lot of the manzanita is one of the reasons why manzanita is such a good plant is that it starts blooming in December and continues through. It's still blooming in my garden, and it's another great hummingbird plant that if you've got room for manzanitas, they are fantastic nectar plants. I would say feeders. So I don't use feeders in my yard, not a one. I have plenty of birds. A lot of people do like feeders. Feeders are really can be helpful, but there are a few things you have to watch out for. One is that you may be feeding, invasive squirrels, pigeons, and sparrows that you don't really want to feed. So being careful about that. Also, it can attract birds in a higher density than they should naturally occur. And so they tend to spread disease more easily in that setting. So I don't highly recommend feeders, but I know a lot of people have them. My neighbors on either side of me have bird feeders, so I can see that they do have more birds in their front yards than I do because they've got feeders for them. But I have just the same diversity or more, and I don't have to worry about the mess. I don't have to worry about keeping them clean. I don't have to worry about the expense of feeding them bags and bags, and I don't have to don't have as much squirrel damage. So I don't recommend them highly, but if you love having the birds in easy to observe locations, feeders can really help with that. And so be careful about where you place them. They really are best actually closest to your windows, because birds will collide with windows as when they're startled, especially, and that happens a lot at feeders. You know, a Cooper's hawk comes in for because a bird feeder is also a Cooper's hawk feeder. They're not feeding on the seed; they're feeding on the birds that you brought in. That's a bird feeder, right? Oftentimes, when a Cooper's hawk comes in, you know, the birds will fly as fast as they can in whichever direction looks the best, and that's often a window. The worst danger zone is in the first 20 feet from the window. Sometimes people recommend, oh, plant it more than 20 feet. That's actually not true. It's just that it doesn't get worse after 20 feet. Whereas up, you know, from about a foot until about 20 feet, it gets worse and worse. So really close to your windows is best. And really what's best is to make sure your windows are treated to avoid collisions. Water in our region is really critical. Birds often don't have good water sources in many neighborhoods. The water has been put into culverts, and so it's underground, and the surface streams don't even exist anymore. So providing water is a really easy way to draw birds in. It will draw crows in. And I know there's a few people I've seen a few comments about, like, what do you do about crows? Well, crows are native birds. Yes, they are nest predators. They will eat eggs and baby birds, and they will take those eggs and baby birds and bring them to your bird bath and wash them before they give them to their young, and leave little bits of baby bird in your bird bath. But while it's a little unappealing, crows are really magnificent birds, and they are part of the system here. So I would say don't worry about them. Yes, they're gonna take some offspring, but that's part of the normal cycle for birds, right? If, as I like to say, a robin can have 5 to 6 nestlings. If every single robin nestling lived to adulthood, we would be up to our eyeballs in robins. So it is okay that there are predators. We don't want to subsidize them. So a cat or even a raccoon can be a subsidized predator. And so if your trash is not well managed, and you have food waste that's accessible to raccoons and opossums and skunks, right? You are subsidizing a predator, and a well-fed predator is much more efficient at killing, right? If you think back to Jurassic Park, would you rather have a half-starved velociraptor chasing you, or a very well-fed one? There's no question in my mind. I do not want to be chased by something that is at its peak of performance, because it is well fed and has all the muscle mass it could possibly have. Birds really love moving water, and so adding a trickle fountain, these solar activated mini fountains that you can just float in a bird bath, are a nice way to get a little bit of activity and sound that will draw birds in. The one thing I would strongly caution, so that bird baths the water can get contaminated pretty easily, and so you really need to keep it clean. And it's honestly, it's more important to keep it clean than it is to provide that water, right? Their birds are going to use their entire landscape. They're going to find other sources. So I have a bird bath, and every morning I walk past it. If I don't have time to stop and clean it and refresh the water, I leave the hose out unless I have company coming, so I can do that easily. If I don't have time to do that, I just knock the water out of it and leave it dry for the day, because it is better to have fresh, clean water than or no water. It's important to keep that water clean.
So you feel that water, the bird bath should be refreshed and like brushed out daily?
Yeah, it's my experience that if I'm maybe there's a day if it's been rainy or cool, but pretty much every day. And you take one look at it, and you'll see there's either algae is developing on it, or bacteria, or you'll see birds will often defecate when they're bathing. It's a something they like to do, and so they will often soil the bath if you're not on top of it. It doesn't need it. It doesn't need it daily. If it doesn't need it daily, it doesn't need it. But you should look at it daily and see that it's now depending on your it depends on your feature, right? Because a larger water feature may never need cleaning, right? If you've got a recirculating fountain that's that with enough volume in it, if it's still running, it'll be fine. But a simple bird bath, that will need it on a daily basis. Providing shelter is another piece of it. So it's so you could have a garden of all native plants, and if your yard doesn't provide places where birds can hide, where they can build nests, where they have places where their food has shelter too. So those things are really important. So thinking about as you're designing your yard, do I have places where the foliage and branches are going to be dense enough that that birds can hide, that birds have places to build nests? All of those things matter. So leaving leaf litter for ground nesting birds is also important, although most of us probably don't have big enough yards for ground nesting birds. Nevertheless, that creating those the diversity of structural sitting when we prune matters also. So nesting season, I can. And this is the thing I get the most phone calls about. Is that from people, their neighbor pruned and the mockingbird is going crazy. Like, yeah, they probably pruned away a nest. While those nests are protected by law, there is very little enforcement, and so there's not a lot you can do. But if you are aware that somebody has a plan to prune between March and June, I would strongly encourage you to remind them that there may be nests there, and the nests are protected by law, and so you cannot disturb a nesting bird. Now there are some birds, so hummingbirds nest as early as December. There are other birds, the birds of prey often start nesting as early as February. It depends on the year. This year, a lot of the early nesting, well, the hummingbirds nested on time, but some of the raptors seem to start a little late this year because it was cold and wet. So birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Protection Act. So all migratory birds, with some exception of game birds, are protected from harassment, killing, or from taking their products. That's why technically you are not, if you see a bird feather on the ground, you can't pick it up and add it to your personal collection, right? Because there would be no way for an agent to, a law enforcement person to be able to say, was that a feather that you picked up, or did you kill a bird to take that feather? Since you can't do that, you can't tell. It's just against the law to have bird feathers, wild bird feathers. There are few exceptions, but anyway, so pruning from September to late in early fall, September to December is really the best time to do it in terms of birds. And it's sort of, to me, it's one of the tragedies of many of the fire rules is that they all have, like you have to do all your pruning in Orinda before June 1st. Well, if you're pushing up to the deadline of June 1st, you're hitting right during the peak of nesting season for birds, which is the worst time to be pruning anything. Reducing threats in our home, keeping your cats under control, indoors, enclosed, on a leash. This is a fabulous catio in Berkeley from a family of the Golden Gate Bird Alliance members and active environmentalists, and they have, this is a do-it-yourself. You can see the cat on this. Protected from the birds and also protected from coyotes, right? Coyotes are really problematic for cats if you let your cat out. So keep your cat safe, keep the birds safe, keep lizards safe, and keep our native rodents safe as well. One of the things that people, oh, the cats eat the mice. Well, actually, cats will prefer to eat any of our native mice over house mice and house rats. And so, in fact, what happens when you introduce free-ranging cats into a place where there are rodents, the rodent population shifts pretty quickly from native species to non-native species, because house mice have been living with cats for millennia and are better than our native mice at avoiding cats. Pesticides and rodenticides, again, are things to avoid. Because land birds are feeding insects to their young, that means if you're using pesticides in your garden, they are getting on the insects, and the insects and the pesticides are bioaccumulating. So there'll be more in the baby bird than there were in a single insect, and it can have pretty significant impacts. This is my just like rodenticides, a big no. Herbicides, big no. Class of I'll just move on. There's neonicotinoids. Thank you. That's what this is like. It's supposed to remind us all that neonicotinoids are particularly bad. They have really devastating effects on bees, and end up in our food chain as well. So here's what to do, right? Plant natives, keep your cats indoors, avoid pesticides, provide water, leave your leaves, treat your windows. And I think the most important thing is to tell your neighbors. Don't just do it, but explain to your neighbors why you're doing it, because that's the more people we can get to do it, the better it is for birds. This is my garden this morning, and because it's a brand new planted planted last year, lots of plants from Pete, probably half of the plants, and so they arrived in 1 gallon plants, 1 gallon pots. They are more than twice as big as they were when I planted them, but they're still pretty small. And so right now my garden looks primarily like an annual garden. These are all Larner seeds, natives. And I tried as much as possible to have things that are really native in this region, but there are a few things, interlopers from elsewhere in the state in my garden. Anyway.
So Glenn, that was so interesting. Thank you very much. It was great to hear about what we can do for birds. There's just so many things that we can do for birds, I think, that are just not that hard, like to quit spraying pesticides. Like I haven't used pesticides in 35 years. I don't miss them. My garden looks great, not using the rodenticides. The Contra Costa Water District is a longtime sponsor of the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour, and I have really enjoyed collaborating with their dedicated and hardworking staff over the years. If you live in the Contra Costa Water District service area, you'll be pleased to know that you can receive a lawn removal rebate of $1 per square foot, up to $2,000 total. The district's rebate now allows you to get paid for removing your back lawn as well as the front, which is really a great new benefit. The Contra Costa Water District also offers a fabulous landscape design assistance program. In this program, customers can receive a free 2-hour consultation from a professional landscape designer to help explore ideas and make recommendations on the layout, plants, and other features that may work for your front yard. Visit ccwater.com/lawn to garden to find out more. To show you an example of the kind of assistance you can receive through the district's landscape design assistance program, this was designed by Kelly Marshall. She's one of the designers on their list. This is Dan and Lisa Winkett's garden in Concord. It was on the tour last year. And this is Kelly's own garden in Clayton, which of course she designed also. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us.